What is that? Guess I need a new chair. Hey, howdy, hi, how's it going? My name is Mason, and I'm going to scoot forward so that this whole video is not just squeaking. You're watching Once Upon a D20's Beginner's Guide to Dungeoneering, and as those of you with a high perception will note, Jeremy is not with me today. Since Jer cannot join me, which he cannot join me because he, as hopefully any good father would, is taking care of his family during a difficult time. There should not be cause for drastic and immediate concern, but Jer is keeping cautious and the family is keeping quarantined, and so it is just me on this particular video. So as a result of that, I thought maybe I would follow in Jer's footsteps from an earlier episode and talk a little bit about my particular journey with Dungeons and Dragons. How I ended up, you know, liking it enough to spend some of my time recording YouTube videos about it and playing it as much as I do. I've been thinking about what got me into D&D ever since I knew that I was going to be recording this video alone. And while I can distinctly point to the first time that I played it, I thought about playing it a fair amount beforehand for a number of reasons. For one thing, I love making stories. As we have referenced once or twice, more Jer than me, because you know, I feel a little bit awkward when I plug myself, which that's good wording. I feel a little bit awkward when I, you know, advertise, as it were. Yeah, I just feel a little bit weird, which of course I need to change up and do differently, because, you know, if you're not gonna advertise, you who is? But that being said, I write books in my spare time. I self-published my first book in 2019, currently working on a short story, working on getting the sequel out, and then I have a fantasy novel that I plan to start on soon. Storytelling's always been big for me, ever since I was a kid. My siblings and I'm from a fairly large family. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. I can already hear some people in the background being like, wow, that's a lot of people. Your parents are brave. Your parents must have gone insane, things like that. And the answer to all of those is yes. But yeah, I was the oldest of 6 kids, and we would always play pretend when we were kids. And it was always fun for me to come up with the stories for what we were doing, right? And now I've grown up, and that's kind of fed its way into writing. And also into the story kind of cultivation that Dungeons and Dragons permits. The other aspect of D&D that I think really appealed to me is just the collaboration, the being with people. In the best of ways, it feels like I'm a kid with my siblings again. And there are probably some people out there in the world that would say it's not very mature, not very grown up on my part. But if you can't have that just sweet joy and fun while you and your friends imagine together, I don't know, I feel like you've lost something, right? And I think that D&D is maybe a way for me to catch that lightning in a bottle as a grown man. So I think that's a big part of it. I also, connecting with people has always been important to me. I don't know if that's just because I'm me, or if it's because of having a childhood in which my family traveled all of the time. We were constantly moving. until I went to high school. And so I always felt disconnected. And so I wonder if that's not part of it. That in D&D, we get this chance to maybe on some level connect with people. Through fiction, through fantasy, through these fake stories that have oftentimes genuine feeling at the core. I think that's part of it too. But whatever the case, I was first kind of pitched the idea of playing D&D when I was 18, shortly after I had graduated high school. Life was really busy at that time. I was doing a lot of volunteer work and things like that, and as a result of that, I didn't really feel like I had the time, and I was kind of focusing on other things. And so instead of playing D&D then, I didn't play until I was 20. And I really loved it. I played it for the first time and I really enjoyed it. But again, I was busy. Life was busy. I was working. It was the summer between college years. I was also living with my family at the time, with my parents between the school years. And so they would stay up until like 1 or 2 in the morning waiting for me to come home, and would be like, you're spending 4 hours playing this elf game, which it is. It is, at the end of it, just this silly elf game, but dang it if it ain't fun, and dang it if it ain't good. So I kind of stopped for a little bit after that as well, not just with the parents and things like that, but also like D&D can take up a lot of time, and I didn't feel like I had that time to give at the time. And so I didn't play for some time until halfway through college. My roommates and I started watching Harmon Quest. Not all of it, I don't think. I think I watched all of it except for maybe a couple episodes. But yeah, we started watching Harmon Quest, which for those of you who don't know, it is an online show exclusively streamed on the channel Verve, I believe, VRV, with Dan Harmon, the creator of Rick and Morty and Community, as well as a number of his crazy friends and comedians and the like, who all play a game of D&D in front of a live studio audience in Los Angeles, and then people animate it afterwards. It was just this absolute insane show that my friends and I would watch just because of how wild it was, more than anything. And even though I had stopped playing D&D earlier, I had always really enjoyed it and had wanted to go back to it for some time, but just felt like I didn't have people to play with. And so my roommates and I decided to get back into the game. And, well, in my case, get back into it. And in my roommate's case, try it out for the first time. So the three of us decided to play together. I found a dungeon master, a friend of a friend, who I met him. And I was just talking about D&D with anybody at the moment because I was trying to find someone to run the game for us, because I had played for like 2 sessions and didn't feel like I could do it. And so a good friend of mine, I'm just going to say his name was John. I'm probably not going to share his last name for privacy's sake. John volunteered ever so kindly to run a game for a bunch of total strangers because he is a gem of a person. Just a decent human being. And yeah, so we played for a while, and some buddies of ours from down the hall joined as well. And it ended up being a ton of fun and also just absolutely insane. One of our players, my character, I had been told, I have been given the advice that every character needs to have a really explicit and really apparent flaw, because it enriches your character a little bit. I'd watched like a video essay about Harmon Quest that talked about why Dan Harmon's character on it had more depth than every other character, and it was because he had this flaw that he didn't know his father and he was a coward. Dan Harmon's character was, not his father. And so I was like, what's my character's flaw? What's my character's flaw? And I ended up deciding that my character, who was a Dragonborn fighter, had been a part of a marauding tribe of Dragonborn who had sacrificed children to the evil dragon goddess Tiamat. And had a lot of issues with his dad, who had never been around when he was a kid. And when it had come time for him to sacrifice this child, he had instead run away with the child because he realized, like, I never had a dad and I've killed this kid's dad, so this kid doesn't have a dad. Now I need to save this kid to do something right in my life. So I was a Dragonborn fighter who had an infant in his arms at all times. I had like a sling that carried the baby, like a little baby Bjorn. And I would just sprint into battle with this baby. And all other player characters were like, you are going to kill the baby. And my character was like, if I leave the baby anywhere, the Dragonborn will hunt it down and kill it. So if I have my eyes on it, it's safe. That whole thing. Anyway, one of the buddies that ended up joining us later decided that the coolest thing to do was steal my baby. And you can imagine how the rest of the campaign went. It was pretty much his character and my character jockeying for power in the party, trying to convince other people to side with us in our Cold War against each other, until eventually, during our epic final battle against a big drake, he turned against me in the middle of the final fight as a rogue and stabbed me in the back with sneak attack. And I survived it and killed him. I butchered him in front of the drake. That was my first game of D&D. And poor John still has PTSD about that game to this day. The friend of ours that did that, though, dang it if he didn't have, like, man, I don't know if there's another player that has been more into the game than he was, specifically to steal my kid. So props to him for dedication, you know, props to him for that. I did learn a fair number of lessons from that experience, right? John didn't want that to happen, but it did. And it taught me a lot about what to expect as a dungeon master. It taught me a lot about kind of establishing expectations beforehand, establishing rules beforehand with players, because I've definitely run games with players where if that happened, they would have all been at each other's throats. Like, it would have been really bad. And it wasn't great. Like, there were still some points in that game where I was genuinely angry at the other player, but at the end of it, he was just messing with me because I cared more about this game that he didn't care about, right? Shortly thereafter, John decided to stop running that game. Understandably, I would say. He was pretty tired, felt like he had lost control of it. And as far as I understand it, generally felt kind of burned out on dungeon mastering because of what had happened with this player. And so I decided to go ahead and run my first ever D&D campaign. I had really only played for a couple months at this point, all totaled together, you know. But like I said, I really like to tell stories. And I was watching a fair amount of Critical Role at this point, which I don't know if Jer plugged that. I'm forgetting if Jer plugged that in his video or not. But I was watching a fair amount of that, so I'd also picked up some more like rules stuff, some more kind of general understanding of D&D kind of from that a little bit. I think at this point I'd also started watching Matt Colville's videos, which I cannot plug enough. MCDM Productions and its leader, Matt Colville, are amazing resources for every D&D player and dungeon master. I think we've probably already plugged them before on this channel, but nonetheless, I'm going to do it again because they're great. So I started running for the first time. I had a fantasy setting that I had come up with for a book, and I decided why not explore that fantasy setting through a 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons game. And so I ended up running that game for over a year. The player roster shifted, right? I was still in college, and a fair number of my friends would move away. Maybe they would get married, things like that. So the roster was shifting, but the general kind of storyline kept going throughout until eventually it ended with the remaining players that were still around fighting a massive battle against the gathered forces of the goddess Death, and waging war against the goddess herself to send her plunging back to the lower plane of existence from which she came. It started with a group of slaves and it ended up there, which I think is just maybe all on its own kind of one of the best pitches for D&D that I can give, right? You can go from nobody slaves to saviors of the world with your characters, right? And you can lead them that whole way, and they can change in the ways that you choose during that whole path, which I think is just a beautiful thing. I'm gonna wax a little sentimental here, which I've already done. I've already done that in this video, but I guess I'm prefacing it now for whatever reason. Who the frick knows? But whatever the case, I'm gonna wax sentimental here. In Brennan Lee Mulligan, who is another great dungeon master who runs a game called Dimension 20, which you can feel free to look up. In one of their more recent campaigns, Brennan Lee Mulligan said a quote that I think is profound and expresses in pretty succinct words what many others have already said. But at one point during that particular campaign, he asked the rhetorical question, in this world, what lasts? Growing up, moving as much as I did, and making and leaving friendships as frequently as I did, and then, you know, going to high school and then having everyone leave, and then going to college, and having college be just as transient, right? People coming and going, people graduating, people just starting, me constantly moving through different classes with different students every semester, right? I think on some level that has been a question that I've thought about since I was a kid. In this life, what lasts? Because so few things have, for me personally. And I think on some level that's part of the reason why I like D&D and why I really enjoyed playing D&D with those characters, right? At that end of that year, as we concluded, and as everybody went their different ways, I started my new campaign with my roommates this time. It took place in the same world, though it took place 50 years later. But the previous campaign's characters, some of them were still around, you know? And those of them that weren't around had made impactful decisions that had shaped the world in lasting and meaningful ways. And it was fun, because when their characters would pop up, I would get to give my friends a ring and ask them what they thought their characters would be doing and how they thought their characters would behave 50 years later after all the things that had happened. And it kind of became a way for me to reconnect with people as we all drifted away. And so in the face of the inherent transience that is life. On some level, this kind of shared universe of my own little homebrew D&D world made it possible for something to last, for friendships to last. And I'm really grateful for that. Anyway, this has been a pretty wandering video. It's gone in a lot of different directions, which, I mean, if that isn't my way, I don't know what the freak is. But I don't know if I've got a better conclusion than that for this, for why I'm here making this video. My greatest hope is that you, whoever you are watching this, maybe you don't have friends that want to play D&D just yet, or maybe you do have friends that want to play but none of you know the rules and that's what's brought you here, or maybe you just know me and are just here to see me on YouTube. And if that's the case, holy cow, have I gotten personal and intimate with you guys right here. I hope you enjoyed it. But whatever the case, I hope that you can have as much fun with this game and as many lasting memories and good relationships come from it. It's not a guarantee with D&D, right? For every good game there is, there are 10 others that are just horrendous, where player characters run off with your baby and try to kill you in the moment of truth. But dang it, the 1.5 year long campaign's out there. And if you want to, I'd bet you could find it. Whatever the case, and whatever you're doing, keep going. And watch out for dungeons out there. Well, that's just unprofessional right there.